wäre es natürlich schöner gewesen unter anderen Umständen. Ich dachte mir immer, wenn ich mal in der Agape predige, in so einer richtig charismatischen Gemeinde.
So of course it would have been nicer to preach here under different circumstances. I thought, well, once I will preach in a charismatic church like Agape, I thought that would be like a lot of hallelujahs and amens, and well, that's gonna be more difficult today. But of course, you can participate also from at home at your screens in some form. I'm happy to see that you're still here, that you're still fighting through this situation. That's a very big challenge for churches. That's just the same in the LKG in our church. And in the last few months, we experienced a sort of a mixture of being positive that God will carry us through this. I'm absolutely confident that this won't be the end of churches. But on the other hand, we also had this frustration and the question, where will this lead to? Who will be there in the end? Who will be left? And what kind of services and tasks in the church can we actually still continue and also revive afterwards? And so many questions you have to ask yourself concerning the church. So just the same with you, I guess. But I think it's really great how you manage to handle things and with all the technology and that you can reach so many people. I think here it's really a nice atmosphere for everybody looking and watching from at home. It's a really nice atmosphere here in church. And I've had this dream, this idea for weeks, a prayer, which is that once all of this is over and we can actually come together again and gather, that I pray that then people will come and say that during Corona, I noticed your church, I watched your church services and that touched me, and now I'm here and now I want to get to know you, now I want to talk to you about faith. Wouldn't that be amazing if that happened? So wouldn't that actually be worth all of this if it brings people to Jesus in the end? People, I mean, you have to say that there were never so, the obstacles were never so small to participate in a Sunday service, church service, without any shame, because you can just watch via the internet. And we don't know who's watching on the screens via the internet. We have no idea. So please let us pray together for this. I'll tell this in my church next time I preach there as well. Just pray that something will change in this country and that people will come to Jesus through all of this. This kind of keeps me going. That's my prayer, has been my prayer for some time now. So today, my sermon, I already mentioned that we have this series of sermons in our church. On the one hand, it has to do with the Bible verse of the year, be merciful like your Father in heaven. It has to do with that. And we belong to a church, a group of churches that had a lot of plans for this year, but there's a slogan that will work this year, and that's be courageous in believing. And so the sermon will also be related to this, and it's also part of a series of sermons that I will continue in my church. So we have this tradition that in the beginning of the year we kind of preach our way through the Old Testament. We've reached Saul and David now, and that's something that will be a part of my sermon as well. So just some background information. Saul was the first king of Israel. Before him, they had those judges. We also had sermons about them, but that was difficult because some of those stories are really disturbing. So we try to... They tried to do it, the whole system with the judges. It was supposed to be like a theocracy, God being the leader of the people, but somehow it didn't really work that well with Israel. So the people at some point said, we want a king, we want to be like everybody else, like all the other peoples. And then there was Saul, who, however, despite good conditions, actually, a good basis to start with, didn't turn out that well in the end. And so then the prophet Samuel kind of secretly declared David king. He anointed him. And so then a few years nothing happened. Then David got into contact with the king's household, and in the end he married the daughter of the king after an heroic act. And then Saul noticed that people kind of prefer David. They like him more than Saul, and Saul started hallucinating, going crazy. He wanted to kill David. He persecuted them, and that's where we start the story now. So David had gathered about 600 people around him. They were also somehow a bit clandestine. They were sometimes maybe also a little bit criminal, fleeing or whatever, and they had to maybe hide from Saul. So now I'm gonna read from 1 Samuel 24. It's this story. It's a bit longer, the text, so pay attention. So I often realize that while I'm reading a text during a sermon that I actually think about something completely different. It's kind of difficult sometimes to not zone out. So it says, David went to a remote place. That's an area where there are many caves. And Saul, after having persecuted the Philistines, he heard that David was in the desert. And where exactly? And then Saul, he gathered soldiers and looked for David and his men. And at a point where there was a street and many sheep, Saul went into a cave to, well, take a pee. And actually David and his men were in this cave. And his men said, well, today's the day that Saul has been given into your hands. I mean, David could have done whatever he wanted. And then David secretly cut off a piece of Saul's cloak, but then he felt bad about it. And he said, well, the Lord keep me from doing something to the anointed king of God, and he kept his men back and didn't let them do anything to Saul. So after Saul left, David came out of the cave and he cried after him, my Lord and King. And when Saul turned around, David kneeled and he bowed down and he said, why, Saul, do you listen to the people who say that David wants to hurt you, to harm you? Today you can see it's not true, because today the Lord gave you into my hands, and some of my men wanted me to kill you, but I didn't do anything to you, because you are the anointed of God, the anointed person of God. And look what I have in my hand. It's a piece of your cloak. I cut it off, but I didn't kill you. This shows you that I didn't want to harm you, but you still persecute me and you want to kill me. The Lord will decide over this matter. He will judge, and I will never harm you. There's an idiom saying, bad people commit bad deeds, but I won't harm you. Why does the king of Israel hunt down a single small person? The God be the judge over us, and he shall give me my rights. And Saul started crying and said, is it really you, my son David? And he said, you are more righteous than I am, because you have paid back evil with good. Today you've proven how well you are dealing with me, and you could have killed me today, but you didn't. Who would let his enemy get away when he's in his hand? I know that God will reward you for this. I know that you will be king, and your reign over Israel will will continue. So now swear to me that you won't kill my descendants. And David swore, and then they departed. And so that's the story of the Bible. This story is, I think, one of the really unique stories in the Bible. Like this, for example, the story with the two women and the dead baby and the living baby. There's some stories in the Bible that are just so unique, and you can't really imagine them in any other book than in the Bible. And David did this, and there was actually nothing for him to kind of get inspired by. No plan telling him what to do. I mean, just imagine that the leader of an army that hunts you down comes into your hiding place and he's just in your hands, can't do anything, and he's just peeing, and just you have all the power in this moment, and you have all those choices now that you've never had before. Well, some tell him to just kill him, and then his instinct maybe tells him, well, I'll just be quiet so that nobody notices me in here. He could have also just taken Saul as a hostage and kind of bargained something like, okay, I'll let you live, but I'll be king. So there are so many options that might have been somehow more logical than what he did in the end. And I think it's important to understand that David didn't think something like, oh, that's a weird situation. What kind of a solution can I find now that's really smart and that will end up in the history books? I think it was just the other way around. David had those attitudes, those basic attitudes in his life, and they kind of guided him in whatever he did. And he focused on those attitudes, and those brought him to the solution that we still admire today. And I want to look at two of those attitudes today. One was he didn't want to shed blood without cause if it wasn't necessary, especially the blood of an anointed king. And on the other hand, he also didn't want an opportunity to just be wasted. So for the first one, you need mercy, and for the second one, you need courage. And I think the combination of those two attitudes and ways to approach this, mercy and courage, those can be a great foundation for our own life and for the choices we have to make. If it had only been mercy driving David, he might have just stayed in the cave and done nothing. It would be unfair to kill him and so on. I'll just let him go. I can't do this. But on the other hand, if it had only been courage, he probably had killed him right away or taken him prisoner. So both wouldn't have gotten him to the solution. It was the combination in the end that gave him the solution, which still impresses us today. And by the way, David also knew that since he was anointed by Samuel, which was many, many years ago in this situation, he knew that this was promised to him. And I think that this thought might have been in his head. It would have been logical to think, well, this is the opportunity that God gives me. Like his men told him that now he has to act and he has to take what God is putting right in front of his feet. And that's what his men told him. This is the day that God gave you to just give you your enemy into your hands. And by the way, actually, the background story doesn't actually mention this, what the men tell him there, that God told him this. I mean, maybe it's not in the Bible and still was true, but I could also imagine that those men just whispered into his hand what they were actually wishing themselves. I think they were just sick of fleeing all the time as well, and maybe they were just thinking, well, when will he be king and we will be maybe, I don't know, high officials. I mean, that's what he did in the end. But I think those people, they kind of twisted the information to make it fit their own wishes. And David knew, no, I can't just change God's plan with a violent act. And sometimes we just have to wait for God's plan to fulfill, even if it takes a long time. I once heard Peter Reed, the leader of the torchbearers, say, be careful not to produce an Ishmael while you're waiting for an Isaac. So sometimes we maybe just want to get to the right goal, but with the wrong means. And that might destroy something as well. So, I mean, just having the right purpose, the right goal, doesn't mean that you can use any means. I once experienced a story. It was shortly after my school graduation. I had a girlfriend. It was the summer after school. It was like the time of big freedom, and of course we wanted to go on holidays together, and we wanted to take part in a camp. But then I realized that for studying what I wanted to do, what I wanted to study, I had to do like an internship for a few weeks before that. I just didn't really realize that, and it's just what I'm criticizing oftentimes today with my children, that they're not thinking enough and not planning enough. But I just did the same. I wouldn't say this in my church because they are listening there, but actually, I mean, I just didn't think about it properly. So I had to face the facts, which were that I could either go on the holidays or do this internship. So I told the people where I applied for the internship about my my problem, and the boss there actually said, well, okay, you can just work here for 3 weeks and I'll sign that you've been here for 6, then you can also go on the holidays, which was an intriguing opportunity. And I actually, well, I thought, well, it's not really okay, but I was also happy that this is like a great solution. And I came home and told my mother, and I don't know whether you know this situation, but my mother is a really devout Christian. And then she said this sentence, "There's no blessing on this." You might know this sentence. And she told me, you can't really do this. That's not okay. It's not honest. It's not good. And you have to think about this again. And I was convinced in the end. I actually cancelled the holidays, but I think it was good in the end because my girlfriend wasn't the right woman for me anyway, and maybe I might have ended up marrying the wrong woman. So in the end, it was really good that I didn't do this. But I think that even if looking back, if I didn't realize that it was the right thing, I think it's still important to make sure that you live with a clean conscience. And I'm not trying to be legalistic here, but I think we sometimes just got used to living with compromising and tolerating things that we know are actually not what God wants. And just this thought of making sure that you live with a clean conscience, that's been important for me for a while now. And David, he actually had a bad conscience when he just cut off a piece of his cloak, of Saul's cloak. I mean, it didn't even hurt him, but it still made him feel bad. So, yeah, think about that. And so now more about those two aspects, mercy and courage. I'll start with mercy. Okay, so thanks to Corona, we are living in a really special time. I don't know whether you're aware of this. Jesus tells us to make treasures in heaven. Just how can you collect treasures in heaven? By obeying him, by doing the right things, good things, having fruit of the Spirit and growing in this, etc. So by obeying the commandment to be merciful, that's a way how we can increase our treasures in heaven, to be simple, to put it in a simple way. So, I mean, right now we have a perfect opportunity to show mercy. I mean, when was the last time that people have committed so many mistakes in our eyes, and in schools, in the state, so many aspects where people messed up, and we can be merciful with all of them. We can show mercy to all of them. I mean, we have a great opportunity here that makes our treasure increase in heaven. But I mean, let's be honest. Being merciful with our friends and family, that's the one thing. It can also be a challenge, but it's not really that exceptional. But Jesus, in the Sermon on the Mount, he says, if you only love those who love you back, everybody does this. Everybody loves those who love them back, and I think you can also apply this concept to mercy. Being merciful with those who love us or who agree with us, it's not really difficult to be merciful with them. But then another example, politicians. Just raise your hand if you would like to be a politician right now. I mean, I can't see any hands raised here. I've watched a presentation, a talk lately by a politician who's very involved in a person who's very involved with politics, and it kind of made me realize how much pressure they have and under how much stress the politicians are working right now. They've been working like this for months. I mean, the ministers, Merkel, Spahn, all of them. And at the same time, there's such a huge variety of opinions among the population, and the politicians have to find solutions for the entire country. And I think that they really deserve our respect and from us, our respect. And I think there's not like a set plan, a blueprint for this pandemic. And I think Spahn even said that in a few months we will have a lot to forgive each other. And I think that's interesting because it shows us that they actually realized that they would make mistakes. By the way, this is just the opposite of a dictatorship, because you sometimes hear this now that our democracy is becoming a dictatorship, but that's not happening in a dictatorship, asking people to forgive you. But all this talk about different aspects now, I mean, we hear so much rubbish right now, and I think we shouldn't just say whatever, but actually also stand up and speak out when we hear so much rubbish just being brought among the population. And I think, of course, politicians, they do commit mistakes, but who doesn't? The leader of the health institution in Schwabach, he's working so much. At some point, I know him, and at some point I stopped asking him how much overtime he does. Just remember this when you're thinking about those people. Just be merciful with those people, even if you don't know them. So show mercy. And by the way, I also want people to deal with mercy with their pastors and their church leaders. It's also a situation that's completely new to them, because the way that churches used to work, it doesn't really work anymore. And at the same time, we have so many different expectations. I don't know how it is in your church, but in the LKG, in our church, there are really people who completely pull back or just say there's no corona, or well, there's a whole different variety of people and opinions in there. And at the same time, we have to find a way for the church. And right now, it's important that you pray for your leaders and that you support them, that you stand behind them. And it doesn't mean that you have to accept everything all the time without issuing any criticism, but just in general, having this attitude and the knowledge that they do their best and that they are called by God to do this, and that you just come to them with a certain trust. And this really helps the church leaders in carrying this responsibility. Then who else should we be merciful with? I mean, all the people who don't really have our opinions. I mean, all this online bullying or bullying of opinions. All this wouldn't exist now if people were more generous with dealing with other people, and not thinking that you just have the right to bully other people because they have a different opinion. I mean, you could just go on talking all the time about this now. I mean, sometimes there are people who have a negative attitude towards you, who are kind of enemies, but still, well, mercy, it's becoming more and more difficult, but still, show mercy. We've once had this experience in our neighborhood. There was a family in our neighborhood, and I thought, well, this could end up badly, and we started praying. We didn't start praying that God would make them better, but that God would bless them and that God would just help them. We actually prayed for them. I don't know whether this, what this did in the end, but I can just really recommend this when there's, like, for example, bullying in the school. Just pray for the person who's doing something bad to you, that they will be blessed. Sometimes it might have to be merciful with your parents. I mean, you can tell that there would be a lot to talk about. So, but why should we be merciful? Because God has mercy with us. When we live by mercy, by His mercy, we wouldn't be able to continue without His mercy. Would be, I mean, this world would be a disaster. I wouldn't want to live here without God's mercy. We've just gotten used to it. But I mean, what kind of an act of mercy was it that Jesus came into this world and He actually became like those creatures that had just turned their back on Him. And I wanted to find like a comparison for this, but people don't do this. So it's like you can't compare to anything else. Jesus came into this world of people who turned their back on God, and He still had mercy with them. He gives us a way to get to God. He gives us a place in heaven. So, however, we also have to mention that you also have to accept this forgiveness, the mercy. It starts acting when you go to God and you say, I know I need this, I know I need forgiveness, please forgive me. And that's also why I want to just ask directly, are you sure that you've been forgiven? Have you really come to God with this and given God your life? If you haven't, today's the perfect opportunity, because just listening and hearing about God's mercy and forgiveness in church, but never having accepted it in your own life, it doesn't really help you that much. And once you actually face God, and this is a new year, it's a perfect opportunity to just start with God again. So you could also say that it's biblical to say be merciful because God is merciful with you too. So that's about mercy now. And next we'll talk about courage. So let's think, where do you need courage? There are many situations where you need courage, but it doesn't have anything to do with mercy actually. And I mean, wait, imagine a family like, I knew a family who bought a house and they couldn't actually afford it, with many children and so on, didn't really have the money, and that's courageous. Doesn't have anything to do with mercy, but sometimes this combination between courage and mercy can really make a difference. When I see somebody, if this person continues this way, he'll just run into doom, and knowing this and speaking to this person about it, it requires courage. But in order to just make this work as well, it just requires mercy, not just courage. I mean, in the end, it's really about how I talk to this person, that I'm not arrogant, that I'm not trying to like be the professor, but that this person actually realizes that I care. And that's why we need mercy. I mean, oftentimes we feel like this ourselves, right? When we get advice and we feel that the other person actually cares about us, it's much easier to accept the advice then. And sometimes it's just important to talk to people about something, and that requires courage. But in order to actually give an opportunity of growth in there, it also needs mercy. So could I also say here now, let us be courageous because God was courageous too? I mean, is God courageous? Why would an almighty God need courage? He always knows what will happen and he can just get out of any situation. But wasn't it courageous giving the devil access to paradise? Wasn't it courageous to create a human being with their own will and the potential of making choices that are not the way he wants them? Wasn't this courageous to create this opportunity of destruction in the end, actually? And wasn't it courageous of Jesus to actually accept this challenge of becoming a human being? And I mean, in the end, it was necessary that he was living without sin in order for his life to actually pay for our sins. But the Bible also tells us that he was still tempted. He didn't sin, but he was tempted by the devil. It says this in the Bible. I mean, it was courageous of him to withstand this, because maybe if he'd given in to this temptation, that would have been a huge risk. I mean, this challenge he accepted knowing this was really courageous, because there was a lot of risk knowing that he would be tempted. And I think that every positive character trait people have, God has it in the extreme, in a perfect way, all the positive character traits we might have. So whatever choices that you might be facing, try to have courage and mercy when taking those choices, taking those decisions. So think about how mercy might influence your decision, or courage. And you can also ask yourself, am I courageous? Do I tend to not want to hurt anybody, and that's why I keep back all the time, because I focus a lot on this aspect of mercy? Or am I somebody who's always courageous and jumps at every opportunity, and who doesn't get along just will have to fall behind? Is this your attitude? You can just think about what's your attitude right now. Okay. Then the next aspect is prayer. Just thank God for this fact that Jesus came into the world and he died for our sins. I mean, during this corona crisis, it's become really important to us important to me, and I've become really aware of the fact that we are always complaining to God. And when I pray, I just want to start with praising him, with thanking him, and thanking for his mercy, and just taking this into prayer and praying. And then also I also want to ask God to give me mercy and courage and show me what's the balance between those two things in my life right now. And I just hope that you'll have a lot of good opportunities to do this, and to comfort you, to give you comfort. Now at the end of my sermon, I'd like to read or quote a verse from Joshua, where God says, "Be strong and courageous, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go." So I wish you all the best. Amen.